Hey everyone, welcome to today's explainer. I am absolutely pumped for this one because today we're doing something really cool. We're going to understand the most complex system in the known universe entirely by visuals. We're taking dense biological notes and turning them into a living, breathing visual map of the human body's ultimate internal control center. So if you've ever wondered how you're actually processing my words right this second, or how your heart just knows to beat without you telling it to, you are in the perfect place. Let's start mapping the human nervous system. Okay, here is our visual blueprint for today. We will start at the macro level with the ultimate command center. Cruise down the body's information highway, zoom way in to check out the anatomy of a nerve cell, pan back out for mapping the human brain, and finally, we'll look at the actual speed of thought. Section 1. The Ultimate Command Center. Let's kick off our map by looking at the big picture. Consider that weight for a second, 1.3 to 1.4 kilograms. That's roughly 3 pounds. It's kind of crazy when you really stop and think about it, right? This relatively tiny mass of tissue, safely locked away inside your skull and floating in a cushion of fluid, literally controls every single thing your body does. From your deepest thoughts and childhood memories to the unconscious rhythm of your breathing, the whole shebang originates from this incredibly dense 3-pound biological supercomputer. And our visual map physically splits into two main territories. On one side, we've got the central nervous system, or the CNS. Think of this as the main processor. It's your brain and your spinal cord, and its entire job is to integrate and process incoming data. Then on the other side, we have the peripheral nervous system, the PNS. You can think of the PNS as this massive network of biological cables, specifically your cranial and spinal nerves, carrying vital signals out to the rest of your body and bringing sensory data back in. You really can't have the processor without the cables, and the cables are totally useless without the processor. Working together seamlessly, they are literally how you experience the world. Moving on to Section 2, the body's information highway. So now that we've established the mainframe, let's trace that peripheral highway system. This entire network is built out of exactly 43 pairs of branching nerves. It's incredibly well organized. 12 of these are cranial pairs that pop right out of the brain to handle things like your vision via the optic nerve, or moving your facial muscles. The other 31 pairs branch out all along the spinal cord from your neck all the way down to your lower back. Basically, these 43 pairs act as the literal physical bridge between your central command and your physical environment. As we follow these nerve highways outward, they split into two very distinct branches based on what they actually do. First up is the somatic nervous system. This is all about voluntary control. When you actively decide to raise your hand or walk across the room, you're using these specific nerves to command your skeletal muscles. But running completely parallel to that is the autonomic nervous system. This one works totally behind the scenes. It's handling the involuntary stuff, your smooth muscles, your heartbeat, your glands. It's basically the body's autopilot, keeping you alive and ticking without you ever having to consciously think about it. Now, what's really wild to map out is how this autonomic system splits even further into two opposing forces, just to keep your body balanced. On one side, you have the sympathetic division. You probably know this as your fight or flight response. When you're faced with an emergency, this system kicks in instantly. It cranks up your heart rate, dilates your pupils, and actually pauses your digestion, so all your available energy goes into surviving. But then, on the exact opposite side, we have the parasympathetic division. This is your rest and digest mode. Once the danger has passed, this system steps in to chill everything out. It slows your heart, constricts your pupils, and gets digestion going again to conserve your energy. Section 3. Anatomy of a nerve cell. Let's pull out our imaginary microscopes for a second and zoom way in from those macro highways down to the microscopic structural unit that makes all of this possible. The neuron. Tracing the path of a signal, you can understand how it travels. It's basically a one-way street. Information gets picked up first by branch-like structures called dendrites. Then, the signal passes into the main cell body, or soma, where the nucleus lives. From there, the electrical impulse shoots all the way down a long tail-leg structure called the axon, until it finally reaches the axon terminals at the very end. These terminals then release chemical messengers to pass the signal on to the next cell in line. Now, thinking about that axon, it actually has a special coating on it called the myelin sheath. It's a fatty, lipid-rich insulating layer wrapping the axon. But importantly, it isn't one continuous tube. There are little gaps in between, which we call the nodes of Ranvier. Because of this specific insulation setup, the electrical signal doesn't just travel smoothly down the line, it literally jumps from node to node in a process called saltatory conduction. This jumping action is the secret to why our nerve impulses can travel so unbelievably fast. But you might be wondering, where does this myelin actually come from? Well, it's manufactured by supportive helper cells, and the specific type of cell depends entirely on where we are on our map. If we're inside the central nervous system, the myelin is produced by cells called oligodendrocytes. Try saying that 3 times fast. But if we're out on the information highways of the peripheral nervous system, that exact same myelin insulation is built by Schwann cells. So different builders, but they're making the exact same vital insulation. So here's the really crucial point. How do these isolated cells actually talk to each other once that electrical signal reaches the end of the line? That brings us to the synapse. The crazy thing is, neurons don't actually touch each other. There is a microscopic physical gap called the synaptic cleft. To cross this gap, the electrical signal has to shape-shift into a chemical one. The end of the first neuron releases these chemical messengers, neurotransmitters, like acetylcholine for muscle movement or dopamine and serotonin. These chemicals physically float across the gap and attach to the next cell, successfully passing the message along. It's this tiny, microscopic chemical shower that is literally responsible for every single thought you have and every emotion you feel. Section 4. Mapping the human brain. Now that we've seen how a single neuron fires, let's zoom back out to the macro level and visually map the actual real estate of the brain. The cerebrum is divided into 4 distinct lobes, each with its own very specific job. At the front, you've got the frontal lobe. This handles voluntary movement, reasoning, and even speech production in an area called Broca's area. It's basically your logic and personality center. Right behind that is the parietal lobe, which processes physical sensations like touch, pain, and your spatial awareness. On the sides, we have the temporal lobes, managing hearing, memory, and language comprehension. And finally, the occipital lobe at the very back, that is entirely dedicated to processing your vision. Let's peel back those outer layers and travel deeper into the brain's core to look at the diencephalon and the limbic system. First, we find the thalamus, which acts like a giant relay station for all the sensory information coming in. Right below that is the hypothalamus, the absolute boss of homeostasis. It controls your body temperature, your hunger, your sleep cycles. Then we get into the limbic system components. You have the hippocampus, which is absolutely critical for forming new memories, and the amygdala, which processes raw emotions like fear and anger. This deep, hidden region of our map is really where our most primal survival drives live. To finish off the structural map, we have the foundation at the base of the brain. The brainstem is made up of the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. The medulla oblongata, for example, has absolute authority over your most vital, life-sustaining functions. We're talking heartbeat, breathing, and blood pressure. And tucked right behind the brainstem is the cerebellum. This incredibly dense structure is entirely responsible for coordinating your physical balance, your posture, and all those precise fine motor movements you make every single day. Finally, Section 5, the speed of thought. To wrap up our visual map today, let's see exactly how these physical structures process invisible electrical signals in real time. Visualizing the electrical wave of a nerve impulse, known as an action potential, it all starts at a resting state. But when a stimulus hits, we move to step 2, depolarization. This is where sodium ions suddenly rush into the cell, flipping its electrical charge. Boom. Immediately after, in step 3, repolarization happens. Potassium ions flow out to balance things back out. The cell actually overshoots for a tiny fraction of a second in step 4, called hyperpolarization, before returning perfectly to its resting state, locked and loaded to fire again. And guys, this entire chemical and electrical dance, it happens in a matter of mere milliseconds. And this perfectly illustrates what happens when you need to react even faster than conscious thought allows, the reflex arc. Imagine you accidentally touch a hot stove. In step 1, a receptor in your skin detects the blazing heat. Step 2, a sensory neuron instantly carries that warning signal. But here is the amazing part. Instead of traveling all the way up to your brain to be consciously analyzed, step 3 involves an interneuron in your spinal cord instantly processing the danger. It immediately fires a command down a motor neuron in step 4, telling your muscle, the effector in step 5, to yank your hand away. It completely bypasses your conscious brain just to keep you safe from harm. How cool is that? Which brings us to the end of our visual map today, and it leaves us with a truly fascinating question to ponder. We've just visually decoded the body's ultimate supercomputer. We can map every single lobe of the cerebrum, we can trace all 43 pairs of nerves on the peripheral highway, and we can even chart the exact flow of sodium and potassium in a microscopic synapse. But if we can map the physical wiring so incredibly precisely, will human technology ever truly be capable of replicating the sheer depth, consciousness, and emotional nuance of this biological masterpiece? Think about that for a while. Thank you so much for joining me on this visual explainer today. Keep visualizing and keep learning.